The M4 Sherman tank wasn't supposed to fight like this. Designed for mobility and mass production, it was meant to advance, fire, and withdraw, supported by infantry, resupplied by logistics teams, and rotated out when ammunition ran low. But on the morning of December 18th, 1944, in the frozen forests along the Belgian-German border, none of those assumptions held true anymore. Sergeant Paul "Woody" Woodson didn't look like a hero. At 23 years old, the Wisconsin farm boy had joined the 3rd Armored Division's Company B, 33rd Armored Regiment, as a loader, the man responsible for feeding shells into the Sherman's 75mm main gun. He was stocky, quiet, and had a reputation among his crew for two things: an obsessive attention to detail and a habit of tinkering with equipment that, officially, didn't need tinkering with. 3 days earlier, as the first German artillery round screamed into the Ardennes announcing Hitler's last great gamble, Operation Walk am Rhein, which history would remember as the Battle of the Bulge, Woodson had been crouched inside his tank, Iron Horse 6, watching the chaos unfold around the crossroads town of Stavelot. The American lines were collapsing. Entire units were being overrun. And ammunition? Ammunition was becoming a fantasy. The Sherman carried 71 rounds of 75mm ammunition in its racks. Armor-piercing, high-explosive, smoke. Under normal circumstances, that was enough for a day's worth of combat. But these weren't normal circumstances. The German Panzers kept coming. Panzer IVs, Panthers, and the dreaded King Tigers, while American supply convoys were being cut off or destroyed on the snow-choked roads behind the front. Woodson's tank commander, Lieutenant James Barclay, had gathered the crew around the tank on the evening of December 17th. "We're down to 38 rounds," Barclay said, his breath fogging in the sub-zero air. "Division says resupply won't reach us until tomorrow afternoon, if it reaches us at all. We need to make every shot count." But Woodson wasn't thinking about rationing. He was thinking about a problem that nobody else seemed to be addressing: reload speed. Inside a Sherman, the loader worked in a cramped, chaotic environment. The 75mm shells, each weighing between 12 and 15 pounds, were stored in racks along the tank's hull and turret basket. During combat, the loader had to grab each shell, orient it correctly, slam it into the breech, and then grab the next one. It was exhausting, dangerous work, and it was slow. "I've been timing myself," Woodson later told Army historians in a 1945 interview. "In a good situation, I could get off maybe 8 rounds a minute. But when we were taking fire, when the tank was moving, when I was scared out of my mind, 4 rounds, maybe 5, and that meant gaps. Moments when the gunner was ready, the commander was screaming for a shot, and I was still fumbling for the next shell." The official U.S. Army Manual for Sherman tank operation recommended that loaders organize ammunition by type and ensure that frequently used rounds were placed within easy reach. But Woodson had noticed something else. The best loaders in the division, the ones who kept their tanks firing longest, weren't just fast. They had systems, personal modifications, tricks that weren't in any manual. On the night of December 17th, while the rest of his crew tried to sleep in a frozen barn, Woodson sat in the tank with a flashlight, a roll of canvas belt from a destroyed truck, some copper wire scavenged from a damaged radio set, and a plan that would have gotten him written up by any by-the-book officer. He was going to build his own ammunition feed system. The idea was absurdly simple. Instead of reaching into racks scattered around the tank's interior, what if he could line up shells in a continuous belt, right next to the breech, so that all he had to do was slide, load, and repeat? No twisting, no searching, no wasted motion. Using the canvas belt as a base, Woodson stitched together a series of pockets, each size to hold a single 75mm shell nose down. He reinforced the seams with copper wire, creating a flexible but sturdy bandolier that could be draped along the turret basket's curved wall. Each shell would sit at exactly the same angle, ready to be grabbed with one hand while the other cleared the breech. When he showed it to his crewmates the next morning, their reactions ranged from amusement to outright mockery. "Woody's building himself a machine gun belt for the tank," laughed Corporal Eddie Russo, the gunner. "What's next? A bipod for the commander's hatch." Even Lieutenant Barclay raised an eyebrow. "That's creative, Sergeant. But are you sure it won't get in the way? Woodson shrugged. Only one way to find out, sir. He didn't have to wait long. At 0547 hours on December 18th, 1944, the German attack began. The first indication wasn't sound, it was light. A brilliant flash on the eastern horizon, followed by the distinctive crack boom of an 88mm anti-tank gun. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire tree line erupted in muzzle flashes as German armor emerged from the fog-shrouded forest like iron ghosts. Kampfgruppe Hansen, a battle group from the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler, had spent the night maneuvering around the American positions at Stavelot. Now, as dawn broke over the frozen Belgian countryside, they were launching a coordinated assault designed to punch through the thin American defensive line and seize the fuel depot at Frankerchamps, fuel that the German spearhead desperately needed to maintain their offensive momentum. Intelligence reports later confirmed that the attacking force included at least 12 Panther tanks, 8 Panzer IV medium tanks, and supporting infantry mounted in half-tracks. Against them stood remnants of the 3rd Armored Division, 11 M4 Shermans, including Iron Horse 6, spread across a 2-mile front. Mount up! Mount up! Lieutenant Barclay's voice cut through the pre-dawn chaos. Woodson scrambled into the loader's position, his homemade ammunition belt already draped along the turret basket wall. He'd loaded it the previous night with 20 rounds. A mix of M61 armor-piercing cap shells and M48 high-explosive rounds, alternating in a pattern he'd worked out based on expected engagement ranges. The Sherman's 4 GAA V8 engine roared to life, belching blue smoke into the frozen air. Driver Private First Class Tommy Chun threw the tank into gear, and Iron Horse 6 lurched forward toward its assigned position, a slight rise overlooking the road junction where the Germans would have to pass. Gunner, traverse right. Panzer, 11 o'clock, 800 yards. Barclay's voice was sharp, controlled. Russo swiveled the turret, his hands working the traverse controls with practiced precision. The Sherman's 75mm gun swung toward the target, a Panther OSF. Gee, its long-barreled 75mm KWK 42 already tracking toward American positions. Identified. Russo called out. Fire. The gun barked, the breech slamming backward in violent recoil. Before the spent shell casing had finished clattering onto the turret floor, Woodson already had the next round in his hands. The familiar weight of the M61 armor-piercing shell, its black tip distinguishing it from high-explosive rounds. One smooth motion. Slide. Load. Slam. Up, he shouted, the standard loader's call confirming the gun was ready. Short. 200 yards short. Barclay called, watching the tracer disappear into the dirt in front of the Panther. On the way, Russo fired again. This time, the tracer found its mark, but the 75mm shell sparked off the Panther's heavily sloped frontal armor without penetrating. The German tank kept coming. This was the Sherman's nightmare scenario. The Panther's frontal armor was effectively immune to the 75mm gun at any range beyond point blank. American tank doctrine emphasized flanking shots, hitting the thinner side armor, or aiming for the tracks to immobilize the target. But in the swirling, close-quarters chaos of the Ardennes fighting, there was rarely time for textbook tactics. Hit the tracks. Immobilize him, Barclay ordered. Woodson was already reaching for the next shell. No fumbling, no searching through racks. His hand went straight to the belt, grabbed the shell, and fed it into the breech. The system was working. The third shot struck low, tearing into the Panther's left track assembly. The massive German tank slewed sideways, its track flailing loose from the drive sprocket. He stopped. Traverse left, new target, Panzer IV, 600 yards. The turret swung, the hydraulic motor whining. Woodson's rhythm was already established. Grab, load, slam, confirm. Grab, load, slam, confirm. 4 rounds in 30 seconds. Then 5. The battle dissolved into a desperate, grinding slugfest. German tanks pushed forward along the road, trying to bull through the American position by sheer weight of numbers. The Shermans fought back from hull-down positions, using every scrap of cover, every tactical advantage they could manufacture from terrain and desperation. Iron Horse 6 fired again and again. Woodson lost count after the 15th round. His world contracted to a simple cycle. Hand to belt, shell to breech, confirmation call, repeat. The homemade ammunition belt kept the shells at perfect height, perfect angle. No wasted motion. No lost seconds. We're getting low. Russo called out during a brief lull. How many we got left? Woodson glanced at his belt. 7 rounds remaining. But then his eyes shifted to the standard ammunition racks, still full of shells that hadn't been touched yet. 26 total, he called back. But I need 30 seconds to reload the belt. You've got 20. Barkley snapped. Panzer, 10 o'clock. Woodson's hands moved in a blur. He grabbed shells from the hull racks, the awkward, time-consuming reach he'd been trying to eliminate, and slotted them into the canvas pockets of his belt. 15 seconds. 18. 22. Target moving. Up. Woodson slammed the last shell into place and fed a fresh round into the breech. The gun fired. A Panzer IV staggered, smoke pouring from its engine deck. By 0730 hours, less than 2 hours into the engagement, Iron Horse 6 had expended 43 rounds. Under normal circumstances, with a conventional loading system, Woodson would have been exhausted, fumbling, and falling behind the tempo of combat. Gunners in other tanks were already reporting delays, loaders struggling to maintain fire rates as fatigue set in. But Woodson's belt system was doing more than just organizing ammunition. It was creating a mechanical rhythm that his body could follow even under stress, even in the deafening chaos of armored combat. His muscles learned the motion. His hands found the shells by muscle memory. And Iron Horse 6 kept firing. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the incredible true stories of World War II, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These histories deserve to be remembered, and your support helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. At 0815 hours, the radio crackled with an urgent message from battalion headquarters. All units conserve ammunition. Resupply convoy hit by German armor. No ETA for resupply. Inside Iron Horse 6, Lieutenant Barkley made a decision that would define the rest of the day. We hold this position, he said quietly. No matter what. By 1,000 hours, the tactical situation had deteriorated from desperate to catastrophic. The German assault had successfully punched gaps in the American defensive line. To the north, near Trwapons, elements of Kampfgruppe paper, led by the notorious SS Sturmbannführer Joachim Paper, had broken through and were racing westward toward the Meuse River. To the south, entire American infantry companies had been overrun or forced to withdraw. The defense of Stavelot and its critical road junction now rested on a shrinking perimeter held by scattered tank platoons and ad hoc infantry groups scraped together from supply units, military police, and anyone else who could hold a rifle. Iron Horse 6 had become an anchor point in that collapsing line. The Sherman sat hull down behind a destroyed barn, its 75 mm gun commanding a 180-degree arc across the main approach road. Around it, 3 other tanks from Company B remained operational, but their ammunition situations were becoming critical. Radio chatter told the story in terse, anxious calls. Iron Horse 2, down to 18 rounds. Iron Horse 4, 13 rounds, mostly he. Iron Horse 7, we're at 11. 11 rounds. Inside Iron Horse 6, Woodson had just reloaded his ammunition belt for the 4th time. The canvas was holding up better than he'd expected. The copper wire reinforcements were keeping the pockets from tearing under the weight and constant handling. But his shoulders were screaming. Each 75 mm shell weighed between 12 and 15 pounds, and he'd been wrestling them continuously for over 4 hours. Lieutenant Barkley had been tracking their ammunition expenditure with meticulous care. They'd started the battle with 38 rounds. Woodson had fired through those, then systematically worked through the reserve storage scattered throughout the tank's hull. By his count, they'd expended 61 rounds and had exactly 10 remaining. "Woody," Barkley said during a brief lull in the fighting, "I need you to understand something. We've got other tanks in this platoon down to single digits. When they're dry, they're going to have to pull back. But as long as we've got rounds, we stay in this position. Clear. Clear, sir. Woodson's voice was hoarse from shouting firing confirmations over the roar of combat. Private Shun, the driver, spoke up from his position in the hull. Lieutenant, we're also burning fuel like crazy. I've been running the engine hot to keep the turret hydraulics responsive. We're down to maybe a quarter tank. Noted, Barclay replied. But a tank without ammunition is useless. A tank without fuel can still shoot. It was 1,045 hours when Sergeant First Class Michael Kowalski from Iron Horse II appeared at the side of their tank, having sprinted across 50 yards of open ground under sporadic German machine gun fire. His face was streaked with soot and blood from a shrapnel cut across his forehead. "Barclay," he shouted up at the commander's hatch. "We're Winchester, completely out. I'm pulling back to rearm if I can find a supply dump that's still standing. Can you cover our withdrawal?" Barclay didn't hesitate. "Go. We'll hold." As Iron Horse II's engine growled to life and the Sherman began backing away from its position, Woodson felt the weight of the situation settle onto his shoulders like physical pressure. They were now the primary anti-tank defense for this sector. If they failed, the road to Francorchamps and its fuel depot would be wide open. At 1,123 hours, the Germans came again. This time, the attack was more methodical. Having learned from their earlier losses, the German tank commanders were using covered approaches, moving in short bound from tree line to tree line, using infantry to screen their advance and suppress American positions with machine gun and mortar fire. Panzer IV, 2 o'clock, 600 yards, moving left to right across that clearing, Barclay called. Russo tracked the target, leading it slightly to account for its lateral movement. Identified. Fire when ready. The gun spoke. The Panzer IV shuddered, kept moving for another 20 yards, then ground to a halt, smoke seeping from every hatch. Target destroyed, Russo confirmed. Woodson had already cycled the next round. His ammunition belt was down to 4 shells. Without a word, he began the reload process again, reaching into the increasingly depleted hull racks, selecting rounds by type based on Barclay's tactical preferences, slotting them into the canvas pockets. His hands moved with robotic precision now, beyond conscious thought. Grab. Check the shell type. Slot it in. Grab. Check. Slot. The belt system had eliminated the cognitive load of searching and sorting during the actual firing sequence, but it required this discipline during reloading, organizing ammunition in a logical pattern that would serve them in the next engagement. 2 Panthers, 11 o'clock, 800 yards. Barclay's voice had taken on an edge. Panthers were the worst-case scenario. Heavily armored, hard-hitting, and smart enough to stay at ranges where the Sherman's 75 millimeters struggled to penetrate. "I can't pen them from this angle," Russo said flatly. "Then we force them to move. Put 2 rounds high explosive at the tree line behind them. Set on fire, smoke them out." It was a calculated gamble, using precious high explosive rounds not to kill enemy armor, but to manipulate the battlefield. Russo adjusted his aim and fired twice in quick succession. The shells burst in the trees, and within seconds, flames began licking up the pine trunks. The Panthers, unwilling to be silhouetted against the fire, began moving laterally, exposing their thinner side armor. Now, side shot on the lead Panther. The armor-piercing round caught the Panther just behind the turret, penetrating into the engine compartment. The German tank didn't explode. Panthers rarely did, but it ground to a halt, trailing smoke. Second Panther reversing. Barclay called. "Let him go. Conserve ammunition." By 1400 hours, 8 hours into continuous combat, the situation had reached a surreal equilibrium. The Germans knew there were American tanks holding this position. They'd lost enough armor trying to force the junction that they'd shifted to a more cautious approach. Probing attacks, long-range fire, attempts to flank around the position rather than assault it directly. And Iron Horse 6 kept firing. Woodson's ammunition belt had become legendary in its own small way. During one lull, when Lieutenant Barclay risked a quick radio conference with battalion, the battalion commander asked directly, "Iron Horse 6, how the hell are you still in the fight? Every other tank is reporting ammo exhaustion." "We got a system, sir," Barclay replied, glancing back at Woodson, who was methodically reloading his belt yet again. A very good system. The radio crackled. Well, keep that system running. You're the only anti-tank capability we have left in Sector Baker 7. At 1,530 hours, 10 hours into the battle, they fired their 80th round of the day. The Sherman's barrel was so hot that the paint had burned off the last 6 inches of the muzzle. Russo's eyes were bloodshot from staring through the gun sight for hours. Chun had the engine throttled back to conserve their last fuel reserves. And Woodson had just loaded the final shell from his belt into the breech. "Sir," he said quietly, "that's the last one ready. I've got maybe 3 or 4 more in the hull racks, but they're the weird stuff, smoke rounds, a couple of white phosphorus." Barkley nodded slowly. "Then we make these last few count." But at 1,545 hours, something unexpected happened. The radio burst to life with a transmission that made every man in the tank sit up straight. "All units Sector Baker. Resupply column has broken through. ETA your position, 15 minutes. Hold what you've got." 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. At 1,552 hours, a Panzer IV appeared at the tree line, 700 yards out, its commander clearly conducting a reconnaissance to determine if the American position was still occupied or had been abandoned. "Last AP round," Woodson said, patting the shell now sitting in the breech. "Make it count, Eddie." Russo took his time, breathing slowly, compensating for the slight wobble in the sight picture caused by his own exhaustion. He squeezed the trigger. The Panzer IV lurched, its turret hatches blowing open as the crew bailed out. "That's how you spend your last bullet," Barkley said with grim satisfaction. At 1,557 hours, 15 minutes before the resupply convoy reached them, Iron Horse 6 sat silent, its gun finally empty. Woodson slumped against the turret wall, his ammunition belt hanging limp and empty beside him. They had fired 81 rounds across nearly 11 hours of continuous combat. But they had held the line. The resupply convoy that rolled into Sector Baker 7 at 1,612 hours on December 18th, 1944, found a battlefield that looked like a vision of mechanized hell. Burned-out German tanks littered the approaches to the road junction. 12 confirmed kills, another 6 probables damaged and abandoned by their crews. Shell craters pockmarked the frozen earth. The destroyed barn that had served as Iron Horse 6's primary firing position was nothing more than charred timber and scattered stone. And in the middle of it all sat a single M4 Sherman, its barrel elevated slightly, engine idling, crew slumped in exhaustion inside. Captain Richard Hoffner, Company B's commanding officer, had accompanied the resupply column personally. He climbed onto Iron Horse 6 rear deck and rapped on the turret hatch. Lieutenant Barkley's soot-blackened face appeared a moment later. "Christ, Jim," Hoffner said quietly. "We thought you were gone. Radio went dead 2 hours ago. Battery died," Barkley replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Couldn't spare the engine power to charge it. We've been running on fumes." Hoffner looked across the killing field in front of the Sherman's position. "How many did you engage?" "Stopped counting after 20. Woody, Sergeant Woodson, fired 81 rounds. 81 rounds in one day from a single Sherman." Barkley shook his head as if he couldn't quite believe his own words. "Sir, I need you to see something." Inside the turret, Woodson had barely moved. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from simple muscular exhaustion. When Captain Hoffner squeezed into the cramped space and saw the homemade ammunition belt draped along the turret basket wall, he went silent. "What am I looking at, Sergeant?" Hoffner asked. Woodson explained the system, the canvas pockets, the copper wire reinforcement, the organized pattern that allowed for continuous feeding without searching through scattered ammunition racks. His voice was hoarse, each word an effort. Hoffner ran his hand along the belt, examining the stitching, the wire work, the logical simplicity of it. "And this is what kept you firing for 11 hours. "It's what let me keep up with the tempo, sir," Woodson replied. "Normally, I'd be dead tired after 40, 50 rounds. Fumbling, slowing down. But this gave me a rhythm. Muscle memory. I didn't have to think. I just had to move." The captain looked at Barkley. "Permission to document this?" "Granted, sir." What happened over the next 3 weeks would transform Sergeant Paul Woodson's improvised solution into official U.S. Army doctrine, though the path wasn't straightforward. On December 20th, Captain Hoffner submitted a field report to 3rd Armored Division headquarters describing the engagement at Stavelot and specifically noting Woodson's ammunition belt system. The report included hand-drawn diagrams and a recommendation that the design be evaluated for wider adoption. Initially, the response from division ordnance officers was skeptical. The official position, detailed in a December 27th memo discovered in post-war archives, stated, "While Sergeant Woodson's improvisation showed commendable initiative, modification of ammunition storage systems without proper engineering evaluation could compromise crew safety and vehicle combat effectiveness." But the casualty reports from the Battle of the Bulge told a different story. American armor had been decimated, not just by German guns, but by the simple mathematics of ammunition depletion. Tanks that ran dry were forced to withdraw or destroyed in place. Loader fatigue was identified as a significant factor in reduced fire rates during extended engagements. On January 8, 1945, a team of ordnance engineers from the Army Ground Forces Equipment Review Board arrived at 3rd Armored Division's rear area headquarters specifically to interview Woodson and examine his ammunition belt. The session lasted 4 hours. Woodson demonstrated the loading sequence, explained his design choices, and answered technical questions about durability and interference with other turret operations. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Holbrook, the senior engineer on the team, later wrote in his evaluation report, "Sergeant Woodson has, through practical battlefield experience, solved a problem that our design teams failed to adequately address: the human factor in sustained fire operations. His belt system reduces cognitive load, eliminates wasted motion, and creates a repeatable loading pattern that can be maintained even under extreme stress." By January 25th, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department had produced a standardized version of Woodson's design, designated the M1945 Auxiliary Ammunition Organizer in official documentation, but known universally among tank crews as Woodson's belt. The production version used reinforced canvas duckcloth with brass grommets instead of copper wire. Each belt held 20 rounds and could be installed in any M4 Sherman variant without modification to existing ammunition racks. Priority production runs began in early February 1945, with initial distribution to armored units still engaged in heavy combat in Germany. Field reports from March 1945 documented measurable improvements in loader performance. Tanks equipped with the ammunition belts showed an average 23% increase in sustained fire rates during extended engagements. Loader fatigue, measured by decreased reload times over the course of a battle, was reduced by approximately 30%. Perhaps most importantly, tanks stayed in the fight longer before requiring resupply. Sergeant Woodson himself continued fighting through the remainder of the war. He participated in the drive across Germany, crossed the Rhine with his division in March 1945, and was present when 3rd Armored Division linked up with Soviet forces at the Elbe River in April. He never sought recognition for his innovation. When Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper, attempted to interview him in March 1945 for a feature story, he declined. "I just wanted my gun to keep shooting," he told a reporter. "That's all any of us wanted." The official commendation came anyway. On April 15, 1945, less than a month before V-Day, Sergeant Paul Woodson was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for meritorious achievement in combat. The citation specifically noted, for designing and implementing an innovative ammunition handling system that significantly enhanced combat effectiveness and contributed directly to the successful defense of a critical position during the Battle of the Bulge. After the war, Woodson returned to Wisconsin, took over his family's farm, and rarely spoke about his military service. He married, raised 3 children, and lived a quiet life. When local reporters occasionally asked about the war, he would shrug and say, "I loaded shells. Other guys did the real fighting." But in the armor community, his legacy endured. The M1945 Auxiliary Ammunition Organizer remained in service through the Korean War. Even as tank designs evolved, from the M26 Pershing to the M46 Patton to the M48. Variations of Woodson's belt system continue to appear in loader training manuals. The principle he discovered that frozen night in December 1944, that organization and rhythm could overcome raw physical exhaustion, became embedded in armored warfare doctrine. In 1984, nearly 40 years after the Battle of the Bulge, the U.S. Army Armor School at Fort Knox invited Woodson to speak to a class of officer candidates studying tank operations. He was 63 years old, gray-haired, and uncomfortable with public speaking. But he made the trip. His presentation lasted 15 minutes. He showed them the original canvas belt, which he'd kept in a footlocker in his barn all those years, and explained the basic concept. Then he said something that the instructors would quote in their lectures for years afterward. People think the job of a loader is about strength. It's not. It's about system. Any system that lets you keep fighting when you should be finished. That's worth more than all the armor plate in the world. The officer candidates gave him a standing ovation. Paul Woodson died in 1996 at the age of 75. His obituary in the local Wisconsin newspaper mentioned his military service in a single paragraph. But at his funeral, 3 elderly men appeared in the dress uniforms of the 3rd Armored Division, veterans who'd served with him in Company B. One of them, Eddie Russo, the gunner from Iron Horse 6, placed a worn piece of canvas on the casket. It was the belt, the original, still stitched together with copper wire. "You kept us firing, Woody," Russo said quietly, "all the way to Berlin. If you found this story as remarkable as we did, please subscribe and hit the notification bell." These are the forgotten heroes of World War II. The innovators, the problem solvers, the men who refused to accept defeat even when ammunition ran low and the odds seemed impossible. Their stories deserve to be remembered. In the comments below, let us know what other untold stories from World War II should we cover next. And if you have a family member who served, share their story. Every veteran has a tale worth telling. Until next time, remember the lesson of Sergeant Paul Woodson. Sometimes the greatest weapons aren't the ones issued by the armory. They're the ones improvised by soldiers who refuse to quit.